I remember it as if it happened just yesterday. My husband, Ryan, and I were sitting in our warm and familiar living room, the kind of evening where everything feels still, except for the soft crackling of the fireplace and the occasional rustle of a blanket. We had been married for 10 years, a decade filled with ups, downs, and everything in between. Ryan was my best friend, my anchor, my partner in every sense, or so I believed. That night, he looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite decipher. It wasn't anger, nor was it sadness, but something felt off. Clearing his throat, he spoke. "Evelyn, there's something I've been thinking about." Instinctively, I braced myself, assuming it was another discussion about bills, work stress, or maybe, if I were lucky, a surprise vacation. Wishful thinking, I know. But what he said next made my heart sink. "What would you think about spending time with someone else?" His voice was steady, yet he refused to meet my gaze. I let out a nervous laugh, waiting for the punchline. "Spending time? Like with friends?" I asked, trying to mask my unease. "No," he said firmly, finally looking into my eyes. "I mean, what if you connected with another man, just for one night?" For a moment, I thought I had misheard him. This was Ryan, the same man who once got jealous over a waiter smiling at me too much. And now, he was suggesting. What exactly? My face grew hot. "What are you talking about?" I asked, my voice sharper than intended. Ryan leaned forward, his tone gentle but insistent. "I've been reading about this, something couples do. They bring someone else into the relationship to spice things up." My stomach twisted. Spice things up? Was he bored of me? Did he think I wasn't enough? Then, as if that weren't shocking enough, he dropped another bombshell. "There's this guy I know, Logan. We work out at the same gym. I think he'd be perfect." My breath caught. Ryan had already picked someone a man I'd only seen in passing. Logan was tall, confident, the kind of person who commanded attention effortlessly. I turned to Ryan, disbelief surging through me. "Have you lost your mind?" I snapped, standing up so fast my blanket slipped to the floor. "This is insane." But Ryan didn't waver. He remained unnervingly calm. "Just think about it," he said. "I wouldn't suggest it if I didn't believe it could bring us closer." Closer? How could something like this possibly bring us closer? My mind raced shock, confusion, anger, and a flicker of something I wasn't ready to admit. That night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, Ryan's words echoed in my head. A part of me feared what his suggestion meant for our marriage. Was this the beginning of the end? Or was there something I wasn't seeing? Days passed, and Ryan didn't bring it up again, but his words lingered like an unshakable shadow. Just when I thought I had managed to push it aside, Logan appeared in my life in an unexpected way. The weight of Ryan's suggestion clung to me, making everything feel different: laundry, errands, even work. Nothing seemed normal anymore. His words had unsettled something deep within me, something I couldn't ignore. And then, as if summoned by Ryan's persistence, Logan entered our lives. One Saturday morning, as I sat with my coffee, trying to convince myself that this was all just a bad dream, Ryan casually said, "Logan's coming over for dinner tonight." I froze. "What?" I asked, my cup trembling slightly in my grip. Ryan smiled as if nothing was unusual. "He's new in town, says he hasn't had a home-cooked meal in a while." I thought it'd be nice to invite him over, no pressure, of course. No pressure? The entire situation was drenched in pressure. That evening, I busied myself in the kitchen, chopping vegetables with a nervous energy I couldn't shake. When the doorbell finally rang, I heard Ryan's cheerful greeting, followed by a deep, smooth voice in response. Steeling myself, I stepped out of the kitchen, and there he was, Logan, standing in our living room. He was even more striking up close, broad shoulders, a confident posture, and a warm smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. I forced a polite smile as I greeted him. "Hi," I said, masking my unease. "Pleasure to finally meet you," Jerome replied, extending a hand. His grip was firm, his gaze unwavering. Dinner went surprisingly well. Jerome was charming and easygoing, sharing stories about his work as a fitness trainer and his childhood in a small southern town. Meanwhile, David was unusually quiet, observing the interaction between Jerome and me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. Every time Jerome complimented my cooking or laughed at my jokes, I felt David's eyes on me, his approving smirk unsettling like he was orchestrating something beyond my understanding. After Jerome left, David turned to me with a smug grin. "See, he's a great guy." "Don't start," I snapped, standing to clear the table. It was just dinner. David leaned back in his chair, unconvinced. "You two got along really well, that's all I'm saying." I ignored him, focusing on the dishes, though my hands trembled slightly as I worked. A few days later, my phone buzzed with an unexpected message. "Thanks for the great dinner last night. David's lucky to have you." My heart skipped a beat. Why was Jerome texting me? And why did his words make my stomach flip? I told myself it was harmless, a polite thank you, and resisted the urge to respond. But by lunchtime, curiosity got the better of me. "Glad you enjoyed it," I texted back, keeping it neutral. The messages became more frequent. At first, they were casual small talk about food, work, and everyday life. But gradually, the tone shifted, drifting into something more personal. "Wish I had a cook like you around all the time," he wrote one evening. I hesitated, unsure if he was flirting or if I was reading too much into it. David, oblivious as ever, brought up Jerome while we were driving. "He mentioned you guys had a nice chat over dinner." "It was just small talk," I said, gripping the steering wheel. David nodded, his tone light. "He said you're easy to talk to, thought that was nice." Then, one night, Jerome's texts turned outright flirtatious. "You have this energy about you, it's hard to ignore." I stared at the screen, my pulse racing. This was crossing a line. But instead of shutting it down, I started typing. "Jerome, I don't think this is appropriate." Before I could hit send, David walked into the room. "Who are you texting?" he asked casually. "No one," I said quickly, locking my phone and setting it down. David gave me a curious look but didn't press further. Things escalated when Jerome invited us to his apartment for dinner. I hesitated, but David insisted. When we arrived, Jerome greeted us warmly, but his smile lingered a little too long when his eyes met mine. His apartment was sleek and modern, exuding an air of quiet sophistication. Dinner was delicious, but the tension in the room was undeniable. Every time Jerome's gaze locked onto mine, it felt heavy with something unspoken. David, either oblivious or willfully ignorant, joked, "You two should team up and open a restaurant. You'd make a great team." Jerome raised his glass. "I'd like that," he said, his eyes never leaving mine. The way he said it sent a shiver down my spine. That night, as I lay in bed, David's words from weeks ago echoed in my mind. "I think this could bring us closer." Closer to what? Disaster? The next morning, another message from Jerome appeared on my phone. "Good morning, beautiful. I hope today brings you as much joy as you bring others." I knew I needed to end this. But a part of me wasn't ready to let go of the attention, the excitement. Torn between loyalty to my marriage and the intoxicating pull of something forbidden, I typed back. "Jerome, we need to talk." His reply was immediate. "Of course, when and where?" "Today, somewhere public." We agreed to meet at a cafe that afternoon. As I got ready to leave, guilt weighed heavily on me. I told myself this was about setting boundaries, about making things right. But deep down, I wasn't sure if that was the truth or just a convenient lie. The cafe was quiet, the kind of place where people nursed their drinks in solitude, lost in laptops and newspapers. I spotted Jerome instantly. He was hard to miss, his broad shoulders dwarfing the tiny chair he sat on. His confident posture drew glances from a few patrons. When he looked up and saw me, he smiled. For a moment, I hesitated. Then, I walked over. "Thanks for meeting me," I said, sliding into the seat across from him. "Of course," he replied, his voice warm. "I was surprised you wanted to talk. Everything okay?" I hesitated, carefully choosing my words. "Jerome, I think we've been crossing lines that shouldn't be crossed. I'm married. This, whatever this is, needs to stop." His expression remained unchanged, but something flickered in his eyes: amusement, disappointment. "You're right," he said finally, leaning back in his chair. "We shouldn't complicate things, but if I'm being honest, I don't. I don't regret getting to know you," Jerome said, his voice steady. I felt my resolve falter, but I forced myself to stay firm. "I appreciate that, but it's not fair to David or to you." Jerome nodded, his gaze unwavering. I understand. No more texts, no more anything. I exhaled, relieved. Thank you. But as I walked out of the cafe, an unsettling feeling lingered. This didn't feel as resolved as it should. That evening, David was in an unusually good mood. He cooked dinner, something he rarely did, and kept glancing at me with a smug smile. "What's with you?" I asked as we ate. He shrugged, his tone light. "Just happy things are finally falling into place." I frowned. "What's that supposed to mean?" David set his fork down and leaned forward, his eyes glinting with an intensity that sent a chill down my spine. "I know about you and Jerome." My stomach dropped. "What?" "I'm not blind, Anna. The texts, the way you two look at each other, I see it all." Panic rose in my chest. "David, He cut me off, his voice eerily calm. "Don't bother denying it. I'm not mad. In fact, I think it's good for us." "Good for us?" I stared at him in disbelief. David smiled, his expression unsettlingly serene. "You've been so distant lately. I thought this might bring some excitement back into our lives. And it has, hasn't it?" I pushed my chair back, unable to sit still any longer. "This is insane. You're okay with me and Jerome?" David stood, crossing the room and placing a hand on my shoulder. "I'm okay with anything that makes you happy, Anna. I trust you. But more importantly, I trust us." His words were meant to be reassuring, but they only made me feel trapped. After that, I avoided Jerome completely. I ignored his texts, didn't answer his calls. But he wasn't the type to be easily deterred. One evening, as I left work, I spotted him waiting in the parking lot. "Jerome?" I glanced around nervously. "What are you doing here?" "I needed to see you," he said, his voice low. "You've been avoiding me." "Because I told you this has to stop." I stepped back, creating distance. But Jerome didn't budge. "Anna, I don't think you understand. David brought me into this for a reason. He wants me here, and honestly, so do you." His words hit me like a punch to the gut. "What are you talking about?" Jerome's smile was cold. "You think this is all just a coincidence? David and I have been talking about this for months. He wanted to shake things up. He thought I'd be good for you." I stared at him, my mind spinning. "You're lying." "Am I?" He pulled out his phone, scrolling through his messages before holding the screen up for me to see. There it was. A string of texts between him and David. Conversations discussing me like I was some kind of project. "Why are you telling me this?" I demanded, my voice shaking. Jerome's expression softened. "Because I don't think you deserve to be manipulated like this. David's playing games, and you're stuck in the middle." That night, I confronted David. He didn't even try to deny it. "I just wanted to help you find yourself again," he said, his tone infuriatingly calm. "You've been so unhappy, Anna. I thought Jerome could spark something in you. You had no right." My hands trembled with anger. David sighed. "Maybe not, but I did it for us, for you, for me." I let out a bitter laugh. "You did this for yourself. To control me." His face darkened, the calm mask slipping. "That's not fair." What's not fair is dragging someone else into our marriage like it's some kind of game." The argument escalated, words flying like daggers. By the time it was over, I felt like a stranger in my own home. In the days that followed, I packed my things and left. David tried to apologize, to convince me to stay. But the damage was done. As for Jerome, he sent me one final message. "I'm sorry for my part in all of this. I hope you find what you're looking for." I didn't respond. For the first time in years, I was on my own, uncertain of what lay ahead. But one thing was certain: I would never let anyone else dictate my happiness again.